Well, hey guys, here's another Tomes of Terror book review. So, I'm sure I've probably mentioned this a few times on this series before, but I'm usually not a massive fan of like vampire media in general, movies or novels or anything like that. Now, there have been several that I've been really into, but I don't know, kind of like over the years, I feel like vampires as a monster, like featuring in movies and books, are a little bit stale for me. So I don't usually seek out anything that's specifically about vampires, with very, very few exceptions. However, there was something, I don't know what it was, but something about the cover and the title of Jacqueline Holland's 2023 debut novel, The God of Endings, kind of piqued my interest when it came up in my Kindle Unlimited recommendations. And I didn't like, it wasn't a kind of case where, because remember like a book I reviewed a long time ago, I think it was called Dark Corner or something like that, that I didn't know was a vampire novel when I started, and I was like, oh, it's vampires. This one I absolutely did read the short blurb, and it stated that not only was this a vampire story, it's also historical fiction largely, which is another genre that I'm kind of ambivalent about. Like I've really, really liked some historical fiction, but then some of it I'm not. Again, it's not really something I seek out, but sometimes if I come across something that's like that, like I end up liking it. But so this is a vampire novel and also historical fiction. But so even with that though, like for some reason, like I said, this book just kind of like called to me. And it turns out I'm really, really glad it did, because this was phenomenal. This book was easily, easily one of the best horror novels I've read in a long, long time. I mean, it's beautifully written. It's emotionally engaging. Like, I got really invested in all the characters. It's very epic in scope, like it spans like 150 years or something like that, but it's still like really, really tightly focused. It's not like sprawling all over the place, and it's just completely and utterly immersive, you know what I mean? So, I have to say I'm as shocked as anyone else that a historical vampire novel actually genuinely like knocked my socks off, but here we are talking about it. I'm also flabbergasted that this is Jacqueline Holland's first published novel, because holy shit, this was fantastic. So the story starts in 1834, and there's a young girl who is variously called Anya or Anna in this time period, and she's helping her dad in his work. He's a stonemason. Like, he actually like carves gravestones. Like, he's like a master at it. Not long after this, though, tuberculosis kind of rages through her village, and along with that comes like a lot of superstition from the church about vampires, you know what I mean? Because all these people are dying of TB. They didn't really know what it was, because they were kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and they were saying, oh, it's like, we opened the coffin and they had blood all over their mouth and it's a vampire, blah blah blah. Now, Anya's entire family dies of the disease. And then the poor kid, who is kind of starting to get sick herself, she's kind of forced to endure the backward townsfolk burning her family's bodies, even though she was very insistent that she wanted them buried on their farmland, you know what I mean? But they're like, no, we have to burn them, and then you have to eat the ashes, like, to make sure that they don't come back from the dead. Because, like I said, it was, like, kind of a superstition. So they forced her to do that because she was just a little kid, and she was a little bit pissed off about it. Now, not too long before Anya's father died, he had written a letter to Anya's Slavic grandfather. Now, I think they say in this that she had met him once, like when she was a baby or something like that, but she doesn't remember him at all. So Anya herself gets sicker and sicker with tuberculosis, and she also eventually dies. But then she gets resurrected by her grandfather, who is this very formidable, he's a vampire, obviously. So he takes Anya to live with him and his companion, manservant, whoever he is, who is also a vampire, whose name is Agaston. And so they take the kid, and she kind of lives with them, like, on the estate for a while she's sort of, like, adjusting to her new vampire reality or whatever. But soon enough, he kind of leaves her to fend for herself, because he seems like a firm believer in people just getting, toughened up by having to figure out how to overcome their own hardships. And the fact that he kind of essentially abandons her and like leaves her with Agaston, and like they go in this horrible like ship to the United States and stuff like that. Like, it's horrible. Like, there's a long scene where she's in the hold of this ship and it's just like there's rats and everyone's sick and throwing up and it's pretty gross. But yeah, so she has a lot of resentment like going forward against her grandfather for like just, you know, abandoning her and leaving her behind. And also she's not a big fan of being a vampire, so she's kind of mad at him about that too. Now, keep in mind that although Anya, I believe, is only like 10-ish years old when she's turned into a vampire, this book actually avoids the whole Anne Rice Claudia problem by kind of having, you know, a codicil in the lore that if a vampire is turned when they're still a kid, they will actually grow into their bloom, as they call it, or into like their prime age or whatever. So they'll go through puberty and everything like that, and then they'll just stay that age forever. You know what I mean? Now, Anya's grandfather, who of course is a vampire, but he was turned when he was already older, so that's why he looks like an old man. So after the setup of Anya getting turned into a vampire and various other things, we jump ahead to 1984, where about half of the book takes place, maybe more of the book takes place in 1984, which in the universe of this book is the present. So in 1984, Anya is now living under a pseudonym, Colette Lessange, and she's running this kind of elite prep school type place in upstate New York, and it's in this big mansion that her grandfather owns, because I guess he owns property like in lots of places, because, you know, he's immortal, right? So her students are, she's got like, I think she has like 10 students or something like that. They're just kind of like the really smart, you know, offspring of these kind of upper middle class to wealthy families in the area. And Colette teaches them French and art history and all this kind of stuff, you know. Now she also lives in this mansion, like by herself. She has a couple of women who like help her out with the school, like do cooking and cleaning and, you know, help with the kids and everything like that. But they go home at the end of the day. They don't live there. So she pretty much lives there by herself. Now, obviously, nobody knows that the now named Colette is a vampire. And so far, she has been able to kind of keep this ravenous hunger for blood thing she has going on. She keeps that under control. How she does that is she has a large number of cats that live up in her attic, and she's trained them to they'll allow her to like drink a little bit of blood from them. Like she'll drink a little bit from each cat. She only feeds like every 3 days or something, and then she gives them a treat. So they're trained like to do that. Now she loves the cats, and the cats actually don't seem to mind. Like, she doesn't seem to hurt them or anything like that. And like I said, she only takes a little bit from each cat, but that seems to be like good enough for her, right? Oh, and okay. As soon as this whole cat thing was introduced, my stomach dropped because I was like, oh no, I know something really bad is going to happen to these cats. And indeed, spoiler alert, I was correct. And matter of fact, because you guys know, I fucking love cats. I have 3. And there is a scene in here that is just like this horrifying, heartbreaking scene involving most of these cats that I don't even want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. It's like, it kind of traumatized me. You know what I mean? So if you're a cat person, just know that that's in there, okay? Just be pre-warned. So Colette, naturally, she loves all her students, but one boy in particular is kind of like her special favorite, right? Like, not teacher's pet, but, you know, she likes him the most. And his name is Leo, and he's, like, I think he's only, like, 6 or something like that. Like, he's pretty little. And he's kind of a little bit sickly, like, he has asthma, like, some other things. And he's also, like, super, super intelligent. He's, like, the sweetest kid ever. And he might be an artistic genius. Like, she notices, like, his artwork, and she's like, oh, my God, he's, like, a million times better than, like, the other kids. And he's only, like, 6 or 7 years old. So Colette is an artist herself. And so she's just absolutely enamored by this, like, prodigious, like, artistic talent this kid is displaying. So she's trying to, like, help him out, you know, like, every opportunity. She's like, you know, they draw together and stuff like that because she really thinks this kid is going to go places. Problem is that Leo's parents are not really ideal. Let's put it that way. His dad, Dave, initially seems kind of checked out, maybe even a little bit hostile. And Colette, you know, at the beginning of the story, kind of starts to suspect that he might be abusive, at least towards his wife, if not toward his kid. Leo's mom, Catherine, seems a lot nicer, but she's also kind of forgetful, and she's sort of like out of it a lot of the time. You know what I mean? Like she'll forget to drop him off or forget to pick him up, or she just seems like she's always like scattered and flustered all the time for reasons which you find out why later on. Now, in spite of Colette's reticence to get too close to people so they don't, find out that she's a vampire, because that would be bad, she kind of finds herself a little bit, and she's very introverted too anyway, just as a personality. So she kind of gets unwittingly drawn into this friendship with Catherine. And Catherine starts like confiding in her about her marital problems with Dave, and also starts asking Colette to babysit Leo, like when she has other things to do, because Leo, like, loves his teacher and they get along really well. And so she starts like babysitting essentially like for free. But at the same time, Colette is becoming very concerned because her vampiric hunger is suddenly increasing, like at an unprecedented rate. Like she's never had this happen before, and she's like 140 years old. Like previously, as I said, she would drink just a little bit of blood from all the cats like every 3 days or so, and that was fine. Like she was fine with that. But now she's constantly ravenous. Like she's always thinking about blood, and she's like starting to kind of lose it a little bit. And at some point during the story, she starts going out feeding in the middle of the night without remembering like what she did the next morning. So she starts to get really scared that she's becoming a danger to others, obviously, and that might put her students and friends and neighbors and stuff like that in jeopardy, clearly. She's also convinced that something significant and probably terrible is kind of on the horizon. She doesn't know exactly what it is, but she starts feeling this lurking presence of Chernobog, who is the titular god of endings in Slavic folklore. And he's kind of constantly, she never sees him, but she always kind of, there's signs that he's around, like ashes falling and various things like that. So she's kind of like sensing that he's always around. Now, the thing about the folklore, and that it is an actual, that is an actual god of endings and all this other stuff, and god of like changes. And so she's kind of like not necessarily worried about her own death, because honestly, she's one of those vampires where she's like, fuck this. It's like, I wish I could die. This is like bullshit. But she's kind of more afraid that she's going to hurt other people. Like her life, she feels like her whole entire life has just been beset with tragedy after tragedy. And, her own death would be like a relief kind of, but she's not exactly sure what this ending is going to be or what these changes are going to be, and it might necessitate like people that she loves dying or her hurting someone like without wanting to or something like that. So she's starting to freak out about that a little bit too. Now, I neglected to mention that while all this stuff in the quote-unquote present of 1984 is going on, the book kind of alternates, like the chapters alternate, so it goes back and forth from 1984, like back to sort of like different key events in Colette/Anya's life in the 19th and 20th centuries. Like, for example, there's a chapter that's set when she lived in like this little French village, like during the Nazi occupation in World War II, and like what happened there. So it's kind of, and it says like in earlier stuff too, like where she lived with this witch and this other vampire and stuff like that. She's kind of a witch, I guess. But yeah, so it just kind of like covers these key events in her life, which kind of illustrate how she came to be where she is today and why she feels the way she does, like about herself and about these so-called Vremini, which is what she calls humans, or what like the vampires in that area of the world call humans. Like, as I mentioned before, she always like felt resentment toward her grandfather for turning her into a vampire, because she believes that she's now cursed to live in a world that just shows her nothing but misery. So a large part of kind of the kind of psychological core of the book is Colette's arc over the course of the story, involving her learning to accept her immortality and kind of live with the reality that things and people will come and go, like while she endures, and that maybe that's not always such a bad thing. Like, because she seems like to just focus on the negative, like the misery, the pain, and everything like that, and seems reluctant to embrace, joy or wonder or anything like that. Like I said, she's not, she's not a bummer to hang out with, like as a character, but she is very somber. She's very melancholy. And so that's kind of how she sees the world. And so as the book goes on and she learns various lessons, that kind of abates a little bit, I guess. So as I mentioned, this was an outstanding book. It was very kind of like almost like a Gothic novel, kind of a similar kind of structure to that. Had a lot of Slavic folklore in it, which was like really interesting. And it also, in the historical chapters specifically, it had kind of like a fairy tale vibe, like Grimm's fairy tale, which I thought was really cool. The main character of Colette, she's very sympathetic. She's very complicated. And she's just like a very multifaceted character. She's kind of like your standard, like, reluctant immortal. And she has a struggle where she kind of wants to live among humans, like, because her grandfather's always like, why don't you come here and, like, live among your own kind? You know what I mean? But she doesn't really want to do that. But at the same time, she's just beset with misery all the time because she's hanging out with humans that are going to die or, like, terrible things happen to them. And she has to constantly keep them at arm's length so they don't find out what she is. So it's just kind of this whole conflict that she has going on. And, and at the parts of the book, like, where in particular she starts to, like, black out and feed without, like, remembering what she did, like, you just feel the horror, like, right along with her, because she's just, like, not down. She's like, oh no, like, what the fuck did I do? You know what I mean? And it's terrible. And it's like, so you really, like, empathize with her, like, this feeling that she's just, like, losing control and she's trying to keep her shit together and she just can't. And as I said, even though she's a very introverted, kind of melancholy woman, she's never whiny or boring or anything like that. She does kind of have these wells of strength that she draws from, and she has a very deep sense of compassion that keeps her from being as monstrous as she probably feels like she is. I mean, she seemed very real to me as a person. And I think that's, like, a testament to Jacqueline Holland's writing. I mean, I was, like, legitimately distraught when something, like, awful happened to her, or when she got close to getting caught, because she did, like, multiple times. Like, I was so emotionally invested, like, not only in her character, but also mainly in Leo's character, who is just such an angel that, I mean, your heart just ached for him, because he was just this sweet, innocent little kid, and, like, he didn't deserve, like, all the shit that got piled on him and stuff. And so, like, the developing relationship between Colette and Leo is kind of at the heart of the story and gives it a lot of emotional resonance. So yeah, I mean, if you love any kind of vampire media, you need to jump right on this, because I think I can almost guarantee that you will love it. I know there's going to be one or two out there doing like, I didn't like it, but you know what I mean? This was really, really good. And especially, too, if you're a fan of, like, historical fiction, historical vampire fiction, you should really, really dig this, because it's really, really well written. I wouldn't call myself a big fan of vampire fiction or historical fiction in general. And I still adored this book, so make of that what you will. So it must have been good for me to, like, be this into it. Yeah, it was so good, and it was so all-consuming that I actually didn't really want it to end. So I think that that's kind of indicative of how amazing the character building and the world building is. And honestly, if she wrote a follow-up to this, I would totally jump on that, like, immediately. So yeah, an easy recommend from me. So that will do it for this Tomes of Terror. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment. And I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.